In 1994, a school bus vanished in rural Georgia. 20 children climbed aboard. None ever came home. For 3 decades, there were no leads, no evidence, no bodies until a buried bus was discovered in the woods with 19 child skeletons inside and 1 seat empty. Now, a cold case detective has uncovered what really happened in the forest that day. And the truth is darker than anyone imagined. September 16, 1994. Knox County, Georgia, the school bus never made it home. It was supposed to be a routine Friday. 20 children, 1 driver. A winding stretch of Tulane Road cutting through the trees behind Briar Hollow. The same route taken every day, the same stops, the same schedule. But that afternoon, the bus vanished. There were no witnesses, no tire tracks, no distress calls, just silence. By nightfall, search teams were in the woods. Helicopters circled. Dogs were deployed. But they found nothing. No wreckage, no skid marks, no sign that the bus had ever existed past mile marker 42. For the families, it became a lifetime of questions. For the county, a scandal buried beneath bureaucratic rot. Officially, it was ruled a tragic accident, an unsolved disappearance. Unofficially, people stopped talking about it. It became a ghost story, a cautionary tale. But 30 years later, everything changed. A construction crew clearing land on the edge of Briar Hollow struck something beneath the soil. Metal rounded the roof of a vehicle. They dug deeper. It was the bus. Inside were 19 child-sized skeletons arranged neatly in their seats. But seat 20, the last row window side, was empty. No body, no bones, no trace of the final child. And whoever buried that bus never expected anyone to find it. The sun hung low over Knox County, Georgia, casting long amber fingers across the fields as bus number 87 rumbled down the narrow Tulane Road. Pine trees flanked either side like soldiers, their shadows slicing across the cracked asphalt in rhythmic pulses. It was 3:27 p.m. on Friday, September 16, 1994, the last school day before fall break, and the last time anyone would see the children alive. At the wheel sat Harold Nash, 61, Vietnam vet, quiet man, reliable, 17 years driving the same rural loop. He was the kind of man people described as kept to himself, the kind whose obituary would mention a war, a hobby, and little else. He hadn't missed a shift since 1986. His bus, worn yellow with a faint groan in its suspension, carried 20 children from Dalton Elementary and Knox Middle, 2nd grade through 8th, a mix off-arm kids, latchkey kids, and outliers from the county's poor ridge communities. Most of them knew each other. Most of them had ridden this same route every school day for years. In the 3rd row, Lenny Krause, age 11, bounced a red rubber ball between his palms, whispering a dare to the girl beside him. Annie Blake, 10, about who could spit farther out the window. At the back sat Ellie Thurman, 12, her back breast into the cracked vinyl seat, knees drawn up, a green spiral notebook balanced on her thighs. She wasn't one of the loud kids. She wasn't even disliked. She was just seen and forgotten. Ellie had a way of fading into the noise, which was fine. She preferred to watch and write. The notebook page held an unfinished list. The bus driver is always watching the mirror. Lenny lies about his dad. Something is wrong with the windows, that I think we're being followed again. She paused, tapping the pencil's eraser against her chin, eyes drifting to the side mirror just above Harold Nash's head. Something reflected there, not clearly, but a flicker of movement behind the trees. A car, a person. The bus crossed a familiar cattle gate that groaned beneath its weight, entering the Briar Hollow stretch. A 4-mile corridor of unpaved forest road, so choked with kudzu and pine that even sunlight struggled to penetrate. The air changed here, thicker, grayer, as if something held its breath the moment you passed through. Harold slowed instinctively. Everyone did on this road. The tires rumbled over the uneven dirt, dry from a long stretch without rain. Dust clouded the back windows. A hawk screamed above. The bus vanished into the trees. By 4:10 p.m., not children had arrived home. By 5:03 p.m., the first parent, Lydia Krause, Lenny's mother, called the school. By 5:27 p.m., the school secretary, a woman named Marlene, with shaking hands, dialed the sheriff's office. At 6:15 p.m., Sheriff Tommy Weldon stood at the edge of Briar Hollow, staring into a wall of green that looked no different than it had that morning. No sign of a crash, no fresh tire tracks leaving a route, just the open gate, just the sound of crickets. A helicopter searched from above. Deputies combed the woods. Volunteers, parents, uncles, teachers formed lines and called out names that would not answer back. There was no bus, no Harold Nash, no children, no good reason. Only the sinking, horrific sense that the earth had simply opened and swallowed them whole. By the time the sun set, Knox County was no longer just a quiet farming town. It was a headline, a crime scene, and a place where 20 families went to bed praying their children would come home. None did. 30 years later, June 21st, 2024, Knox County, Georgia. It was the smell that stopped the excavator operator. Not fresh rot, but something deeper, old, sour earth that hadn't been touched in decades. His machine had cracked into something metal just beneath the surface. He thought it was piping until brushed aside the dirt with gloved hands and saw it. Chipped yellow paint, rivets along the edge, the curve of a rusted window frame. He called over his supervisor. Then they called the police. Within an hour, sheriff's deputies surrounded the site. By sundown, a full excavation was underway, and by midnight, the first body bag was zipped shut. Inside the buried bus, corroded and caked with clay, were 19 small skeletons. Most were still seated. Some had collapsed against each other. No seatbelts, no signs of trauma, no Harold Nash, no bones in the driver's seat. And one seat at the very back driver's side was completely empty. Underneath it, covered in mold and time, lay a sealed green spiral notebook. The name written in black ink, Ella Laner Thurman. The sun had barely cleared the treetops when Detective Monica Reyes stepped out of her department-issued SUV and stared at the gaping trench carved into the red clay. Her boots crunched over broken rock and shattered roots, the ground still wet from the water trucks they'd used overnight to soften the soil around the wreck. In the pit, half buried, lay the school bus. Its front end had collapsed inward under the weight of 30 years of silence. The roof had caved in just enough to hint at decay, but the body was intact, solid metal beneath layers of time and secrets. Yellow paint faded and blistered, bore the black letters KOX County SD number 87 across its side. It was a coffin now. Reyes lowered her sunglasses and moved closer, nodding to the scene tech, who stood guard over the perimeter. Any movement? The woman shook her head. Just us and the dead. The interior of the bus had been cleared of loose debris overnight. A makeshift tent covered the back section to block sunlight, protecting what they could until forensics could finish their sweep. Bones lay scattered across the vinyl benches. Most had collapsed forward or slumped against each other as if they'd been seated when they died, as if they hadn't even tried to get out. Reyes stepped inside. The air was thick, not just with mold and dust, but with residue, grief, dread, history. She ducked beneath a bent metal beam and moved slowly toward the back, past rows of child-sized skeletons. Some still had scraps of fabric around their ribs. Decades old sneakers crumbled under her touch. One small skull was tucked beneath a bench like it had been hiding. She stopped at row 12, left side, the back corner, empty, a space where someone should have been. Detective called the medical examiner behind her. "You want to see this?" Reyes turned. The mead Dr. Beasley, a stocky man with weary eyes and a permanent sunburn, held a clear evidence bag up to the light. Inside was a spiral-bound green notebook, warped and stained by time, but miraculously intact. Letters on the front cover were faded, but still legible. E. Thurman, room 212, he added, "We think this was hers. There are pages that survived. Most are water-damaged, but some near the center. They're still readable." Reyes took the bag and stared through the plastic. The pages inside weren't filled with math homework or spelling drills. They were covered in handwriting, scrolled in ink and pencil, lines jammed into the margins, underlined phrases, boxed words. She turned the bag slowly. A passage near the edge caught her eye, written in shaky block letters. "We're not dead yet, but we will be soon. I can hear them whisper when the bus stops. I think the driver knows. Reyes looked up from the notebook, her pulse quickening. Get this log prioritized for recovery and documentation. Every page. She stepped back outside into the heat, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. At the edge of the site, reporters were already gathering. Telephoto lenses, microphones, vans. The whispers had started again at the Knox County Sheriff's Office. 30 minutes later, Reyes sat in a room lined with faded file boxes and old caseboards. She'd only been reassigned here 3 weeks ago, a lateral move from Fulton County after a blown case in a department reorg. She'd expected noise, narcotics, burglaries. Instead, she'd landed in the middle of what was already being called the worst discovery in Georgia since the Atlanta child murders. She flipped open the cold case file. Case number 9409 KC missing, bus route number 5. Harold Nash, September 16th, 1994. 20 students aboard, all declared presumed deceased in 2001. Bodies never recovered. Photos stared up at her from inside the folder. School portraits, kids in overalls and mismatched sweaters. Faces frozen in a grainy off-center innocence. Boys with lopsided grins. Girls with bows too big for their heads. Ellie Thurman's photo was among them. Reyes frowned. There was something off. Annotations scrolled on the corner of the page in blue ink. Declared deceased. 2001, no remains. And below it in different handwriting, last seen writing in notebook. Described as quiet, watchful. Mother moved out of state in 1996. No forwarding address. Reyes stood abruptly and walked the file to Chief Deputy Lamar Banks, a man old enough to have worked the original investigation. She found him in his corner office staring at a silent TV replaying the excavation site on loop. Sir, I've got a question about one of the kids. Eleanor Thurman Banks looked up, his expression already tired. Yeah, the writer. She's the only one we never found. She's also the only one whose seat was empty on that bus. Banks leaned back. Jesus, I went to reopen her profile. If she lived, don't get ahead of yourself, Reyes. There were bones scattered in that dirt. Maybe hers are out there and just missed the first sweep. She wrote this. Reyes held up a scanned copy of the notebook page, saying they weren't dead yet, that she could hear things, something about someone whispering when the bus stopped, about the driver knowing. She was 12, Banks said. 12, and probably hallucinating or documenting. He looked away, jaw flexing. We had to close that case. People stopped asking questions. County stopped funding. And Harold Nash, he shook his head. He wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a killer. No body, no remains, and no answers. Reyes folded her arms. With respect, sir, you had 20 missing kids and a missing driver. Now we found 19 of them. The one who might have lived left us a message. If she's still out there, if Banks said, but he looked uneasy. If she's out there and she saw what happened, she's been hiding for 3 decades. Ask yourself why. Later that evening, Reyes sat at home in the dark, the scan of Ellie Thurman's notebook open on her laptop. Her fingers traced each line. One entry in particular stopped her. Today we didn't go to school. The bus turned. The road was different. He said there was a shortcut. There was no shortcut on Route 5. Not in 1994. Not ever. Her phone buzzed. It was the crime lab. DNA from the remains was already matching to family records, but there was no match for Ellie Thurman. Not a hair, not a tooth, not a trace. Her seat had been left untouched, and she had written until the very end. The folding chairs in the Knox County Community Hall creaked under the weight of old grief. They'd gathered them, all, the parents, what was left of them, the ones who'd stayed, the ones who'd remarried, the ones who'd never taken their children's photos down from the fridge. Most hadn't been in the same room together since the candlelight vigils faded into memory and reporters stopped calling. Detective Monica Reyes stood at the front of the room. She hadn't slept much. Her notepad was filled with scribbles, names, connections. The notebook entries haunted her. Ellie's voice had a calmness that didn't match her age, a kind of internal compass that didn't drift even when fear bled through the margins. First of all, she said, scanning the group, thank you for coming. I know what we've uncovered at the site is reopening a wound many Ophiu spent decades trying to live with. Murmurs, a few nods, some crossed arms. Let me be clear. We believe 19 of the 20 children who disappeared on September 16th, 1994 have now been accounted for. Forensic identification is underway and families will be contacted privately. But one child, a voice cut her off. Ellie Thurman, it came from Deborah Ellis, whose daughter Kayla had been in 5th grade. Her voice was sharp and patient. Yes, Eleanor Ellie Thurman. Her remains have not been recovered. What's more, Reyes pulled out a plastic evidence sleeve and held it up. Work covered her notebook inside the bus, intact. It contains several entries that suggest the children were alive after the disappearance for at least some time. The room shifted, shoulders tensed. Someone gasped. Deborah shook her head. You're saying they didn't die that day? We're saying we don't know. Not yet. A man in the back stood. Stephen Carr, father of twins James and Jeremy. How long? He asked, voice tight. How long were they? We don't know. But Ellie wrote as though time passed. Days, maybe longer. Silence stretched. Another woman raised her hand halfway, then let it fall. Martha Riggs, mother of Billy. Her eyes were rimmed in red. My husband always believed they were taken somewhere. Not crashed, not dead, just moved. She paused. He died 10 years ago. Still thinking Billy might come home, Reyes nodded slowly. There's one more thing. Someone left this. She tapped the notebook again. Whoever buried that bus didn't take it. That tells me one of two things. Either they didn't know it was there, or they didn't care. Which raises the question, why wasn't Ellie with them? Maybe she escaped, someone whispered. Or maybe Reyes thought she was taken separately. Back at the sheriff's office, Reyes sat with a box labeled Thurman, missing persons. Closed 2001. Inside were photographs, school records, a single pink hairbrush, a letter from her mother dated April 1995, requesting a status update, a torn corner of a birthday card with a stick figure family drawn in pencil. Reyes pulled out the social services notes. After the disappearance, Ellie's mother, Janet Thurman, had remained in Knox County for 2 years. Then, without warning, she left. According to DM's records, she sold her car for cash and never filed a forwarding address. The apartment she rented was vacated mid-lease. Missing child, missing parent. The last note in the file read, neighbor reports mother seemed paranoid. Said she thought someone was watching her from the woods. Apartment left in disarray. Child's belongings untouched. Reyes picked up the phone. Get me a nationwide trace on Janet Thurman. Start with last known address. Cross-reference any female deceased John does from 1996 to 2005. I don't care how old the records are. Check death certificates, psych admissions, hospital intake logs, anything. That evening, Reyes took a detour. The grocery store on Rayner Street was a hollowed-out shell now. Closed 2 years ago. Dusty shelves visible through smeared windows. But the security mirror on the corner above the old checkout lane still hung, cracked but intact. In 1998, a woman had called the police claiming she saw her missing son, Ryan Baxter, in that mirror. Just a flash, a reflection. She was checking prices in aisle 5 and looked up, and there he was behind her watching her. The story had been dismissed. Stress, grief, mistaken identity. But now, Reyes wasn't so sure. She stared into the cracked mirror. If Ellie had survived, if she'd stayed nearby, had she been watching all along? Later that night, Reyes pulled the Thurman notebook out again and flipped to a page near the end. The handwriting had changed. More erratic, slanted, darker pressure. The bus driver doesn't talk anymore, but he whistles. It's worse than silence. They call it the hollow road. They said, we're not lost. We're being reprogrammed. Someone is always watching from behind the fence. A man with a mask like a dog. She stared at the words for a long time. Whistling. A mask like a dog. This wasn't just abduction. This was something else. Something organized, deliberate, and one child had seen it'll. The forensics lab at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was quiet, except for the low hum of refrigeration units and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. Reyes stood beside a metal table, arms crossed over her chest as the forensic pathologist flipped through a tablet loaded with skeletal imaging. 19 partial remains recovered so far. He said, "We're still running full DNA panels, but dental records confirm 13 matches to the original student roster. And the other 6, Reyes asked, still waiting. Bone degradation complicates things, but it's what we didn't find that concerns me most." He swiped to a screen showing a digital reconstruction of the bus interior. Each child-sized skeleton was marked in red, numbered 1 through 19. The 20th seat, he said, tapping the empty corner, had no tissue residue, no DNA trace. Not even bone dust. It's as if that seat was never occupied during decomposition. "You're sure?" Reyes asked. He nodded, positive. The other seats show environmental staining, trace hair, or insect activity. This one? Clean, pristine, undisturbed. Reyes felt it again, that quiet certainty building in her gut. Someone left that bus before it was buried. The next morning, she was back in Briar Hollow, standing at the edge of the cleared trench where the bus had been unearthed. The scent of damp clay lingered, and black plastic now covered the cavity. Survey markers dotted the perimeter. Deputy Claire Merrill approached, holding a clipboard. "We pulled more aerial records," she said. Knox County did an overhead land survey in '95, a year after the bus vanished. Look, she handed Reyes a satellite printout. Most of the area was just trees and scrub. But Reyes spotted it immediately. A perfect rectangular indentation in the earth, just barely visible. The shape of a bus. "Christ," Reyes muttered. "It's been here this whole time." They covered it with filled dirt during the failed bypass project in '97, built right over it. Nobody noticed. Reyes turned toward the tree-in. Somebody had. Back at the sheriff's office, she dug deeper into the Herald. Nash file. The driver, his record was clean. Army veteran. 2 deployments in Vietnam. Hired by the school district in 1977. No complaints. No family. But there were gaps. Between 1982 and 1984, Nash had taken an unexplained SBA to call, that NO record of employment. No tax filings, no listed residence, just a void. She flipped through handwritten memos from the original 1994 investigation. One stood out. A statement from an old student named Reggie Parker, then 13, who used to ride Nash's bus until Hetransford Schools 2 years before the disappearance. The statement read, "Mr. Nash sometimes took us the long way home. Not a big deal, but once he said we had to make a special stop, dropped one kid off early, not at their house. I told my mom. She said, 'Mind my business.'" Reyes highlighted it and scrolled in the margin. "Unscheduled stops. Route records needed." She called the transportation office. An older man named Calvin still ran the records room. "Nash's logs. We've got them in the back. Dusty as hell. Bring me everything from 1993 to 1994. She said, "I want to see if any stop was added late in the year. Anything off pattern." That night, Rehe sat in her kitchen with a spread of yellowed root sheets and old school dot matrix printouts. Each trip was documented, stops, timestamps, mileage. In the weeks leading up to September 16th, she noticed something odd. A shift. August 29th, 1994, that a new stop appears. No address, no house, just a 5-digit code. Number 54791. It's listed every day until the day the bus vanished. She ran the number through DMV, postal codes, school, district zoning. Nothing. Then she tried it as a parcel number in the county assessor system. It hit parcel number 54, 791. Property formerly owned by Knox County School District. Deed in 1981. Sold in 1995 to a shell company. The address was nothing more than coordinates. Not structure listed. But Google Maps revealed a dirt drive off an unmarked road deep in the woods. No access trail. Reyes packed her flashlight, badge, and service pistol and drove to IT. Was nearly 11 p.m. by the time she reached the overgrown entrance. The road was barely more than tire ruts, the forest thick and silent around her. Trees loomed like sentinels, their trunks blackened by moonlight. She parked and continued on foot. Branches clawed at her jacket. The flashlight beam danced across vines, rusted barbed wire, and decaying posts. Then, after nearly 15 minutes of walking, a clearing and at its center a foundation. Cracked concrete steps, a stone well. No building remained, but the outline was clear. This had been a house once. Reyes circled the site. Near the rear of the foundation, her boot hit something hollow. She crouched, brushing away pine needles and moss. A steel hatch. She hesitated, then opened it. A ladder descended into darkness. The air that rose up smelled of rust and mold. She climbed down slowly. The beam of her flashlight revealed a concrete cellar no more than 15 feet wide. Chains hung from the walls, child-sized restraints, scraps of decayed bedding, a single rusted folding chair in the corner, scrolled on the far wall, faint but unmistakable. The hollow route is not dead. We just got off early. Reyes stood frozen. The air had gone still. Evie, somewhere above her. She thought she heard a whistle. The pages of Ellie Thurman's notebook were no longer evidence. They were a voice. Detective Reyes sat in the records room, the overhead light buzzing faintly above her, the green spiral-bound notebook laid out like scripture. She read it 3 times already, front to back, waterlogged corners and smeared ink and all. But every time she found something she hadn't seen before. Ellie had written nearly every day. Not in full sentences at first, more like fragments, observations. A child cataloging horror without having the words for it. Day 1. Bus stopped in the trees. No one said why. Mr. Nash turned around and locked the door. He told us not to scream. We were going to get better. Kayla cried. He slapped her. Then he just stared ahead. For hours, Reyes flipped forward. The handwriting grew steadier, more deliberate, as if Ellie had begun to understand that no one was coming and that someone would need to remember what happened. We sleep sitting up now. The windows are too dark to see out. There's a sound every night like metal scraping gravel. Lenny thinks it's the hatch. I heard him talking to someone. He called them sir. They never get on the bus. They just watch from the woods. They said we're lucky. They said we were selected for redirection. That I don't know what that means. The notebook wasn't the only thing Reyes had reviewed. She now had partial fingerprints, 2 smeared to confirm Ellie's, but age appropriate. She'd also 2 more letters Ellie's mother had sent to the sheriff's department after the investigation was shuttered. Both had been filed and forgotten. One line jumped out from the second letter. She told me the bus wasn't a bus anymore. It was a classroom. Reyes put the letter down. A classroom. Of course, not an abduction. Not in the traditional sense. It was something else entirely. Some kind of forced behavioral experiment disguised as school. She circled the word redirection. The GBE had run into that term before in cult deprogramming cases, in fringe therapy clinics, and once in a shuttered psychiatric program from the 70s called Project Promise. Her pulse ticked faster. She opened her laptop and searched the term Project Promise, initiated 1971. A federally subsidized experimental program designed to retrain behavioral outliers through immersive reconditioning in remote monitored settings. Target subjects, juveniles. Duration 1971 to 1981. Status disbanded after multiple lawsuits. No convictions, but one of the sites listed in the declassified report. Knox County, Georgia. That night, Reyes drove to the county library and met with Patricia Grady, our tired teacher who had volunteered to help sort through old yearbooks and class rosters. She was the one who'd first mentioned Ellie's unusual behavior. She never smiled for pictures, Grady said, flipping through a 1993 yearbook, never played at recess, always writing. I asked her once she kept so many notes. What did she say? Grady didn't smile. She said, so, I won't forget what they did before. Before what? Reyes returned to the station just after midnight. She couldn't sleep. Something about the house with the hatch, the cellar with the chains kept pulling at her. She reviewed the scene photos again. There had been 4 sets of restraints and 19 bodies. She opened the next entry from Ellie's journal. They pick us one at a time to take into the red room. You come back different or you don't come back. I think Harold's not in charge anymore. I think he's afraid, too. The next few pages were soaked beyond recovery. But the next legible one chilled her. He started calling us numbers, not names. I'm number 12 now. The others forget, but I write everything down. I saw something in the woods. It looked like my mom, but it couldn't have been. My mom is gone, right? They say I'm making progress, that I'm almost ready for graduation. Reyes leaned back in her chair, the air stale and unmoving. The longer she stared at the notebook, the more the timeline twisted. This wasn't on day or 1 week. This was months, possibly longer. But why keep the children alive? And who was they? She flipped to the final page, only half intact. If you find this, my name is Eleanor Thurman. I'm 12 years old. My teacher is a lie. My driver is not in charge. They buried the bus so no one could see, but I didn't stay. I followed the hollow route home. Rain clung to the trees like sweat. The deeper Detective Reyes pushed into the woods behind the Briar Hollow excavation site, the less the modern world seemed to exist. Her boots sank into spongy red clay. Leaves clung to her sleeves, and every sound, every branch snap, every drop of water felt amplified in the silence. She had followed the coordinates listed on a parcel map that dated back to 1995. A handwritten note in the corner had read, "Old pump shed access, sealed after 1994. The structure she found wasn't much. A corrugated metal shack, rusted over, its door padlocked and swallowed by ivy. It leaned at an angle, roof sagging in the middle. From a distance, it looked like it could collapse at any moment, but it was exactly where the map said it would be. Reyes crouched. The lock was old. She twisted it with a gloved hand, and it crumbled apart like dry bone. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow concrete tunnel, slick with algae and carved directly into the hillside. Aimtal ladder descended into darkness. She clicked on her flashlight. It smelled of wet wood, rust, and something older. Damp paper, mold, and rot. At the bottom of the tunnel, the passage widened into a low square corridor like an old water management system or storm shelter. Reyes moved carefully. The walls were tagged with chalk numbers 01 through 04, then 05 through 20. At first she thought it was graffiti, but then she realized each number marked a door. Small steel doors 4 feet high, 2 feet wide, like lockers or crypts. One by one, she opened them. Most were empty, except for door 7, where she found a child's tennis shoe covered in dirt, still bearing a faded sticker. "Hello, my name is Kayla." Door 13 had a stack of Polaroids in a sandwich bag. Photos of the children inside the bus, asleep, eyes closed. Some with food trays on their laps, others with medical tape on their arms, like patients. Door 20 was sealed from the inside. She didn't open it. Not yet. Back on the surface, Reyes handed off the evidence to Deputy Merrill and called it in. "We're going to need ground-penetrating radar and a forensics team. This isn't a dumping ground. This is a facility." Merrill stared at the shack. "You think this was part of Project Promise?" "I think this was the local continuation of it. Off books. Maybe someone tried to recreate it. Keep it going after the shutdown. But why kids?" Reyes didn't answer. She already knew because children could be reshaped, rewritten, controlled, and Ellie Thurman had been their chronicler. That night, Reyes reopened the cold case files and cross-checked the original statements again. A name kept appearing, not in the files, but in Ellie's notebook. "Mr. Harrow says we're close to our final test. Mr. Harrow doesn't like when we cry. Mr. Harrow smells like bleach and cigarettes." There was no Mr. Harrow listed in any school record. No teacher, no administrator, no staff. She ran the name through old property tax records. Nothing. Then she checked aliases associated with Project Promise's external contractors. One name triggered a hit. Dr. Thomas Harrow, behavioral specialist, consultant, affiliated with Promise between 1974 to 1980. Last known residence, Homestead, Georgia. Reyes' pulse kicked up. She picked up her phone and called in a warrant. The next morning, a team arrived at the home. A 2-story colonial buried behind oak trees, shutters hanging crooked, the mailbox long rusted over. The front yard was littered with broken tricycles, warped lawn chairs, and a faded swing swaying in the breeze. No one had lived there for years. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and dust. But in the basement, behind a false wall, they found boxes of files. Manila folders labeled by number, each with photographs, psychological notes, punishment logs. Reyes flipped through them with growing dread. Subject 12. Elainer Thurman displays cognitive resistance to group conditioning, high retention, social detachment, risk of narrative retention. Recommend isolation. Below that, a note scribbled in red marker. Will not break. Possibly dangerous. Observing. Back at the station, the forensic team called in with another update. The recovered remains from the bus had now all been identified. Each matched a child from the missing roster, except for one. Skeleton number 18 was not a student. It was adult-sized male, estimated age 60 to 65. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. They pulled dental records. It was Harold Nash, the bus driver. Reyes stared at the wall of case photos. If Nash was dead on the bus, then someone else had buried it. Someone else had driven the bus into the woods. Someone else had stayed in control. And whoever that person was had made sure Ellie Thurman's seat was empty, which meant there was still a chance she was alive, or someone wanted the world to believe she was. The video was grainy. Timestamp 2:13 a.m. and shot from a trail camera positioned along a fence line that bordered the Briar Hollow excavation site. Most of the footage was unremarkable. Branches swaying, insects blinking past the lens until the motion sensor activated, and caught a figure standing just inside the tree-in, still watching. Reyes leaned closer. The man was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a ball cap pulled low and a heavy jacket despite the summer heat. He stood there for 26 seconds, then slowly turned and walked back into the dark. She rewound it again and again. He didn't flinch, didn't pace, didn't look around. He knew exactly where to stand and exactly what he was looking for. By morning, the image had been enhanced by the digital forensics team. The man's face was partially obscured, but a portion of his left cheek was visible. Pale skin, heavily scarred, as if from an old burn. Facial recognition, got a hit. Name, Gerald Vexler. Age 63. Occupation, former school counselor, retired. Affiliation, Knox County School District, 1992 to 1994. He'd been one off our staff members reassigned after the Route 5 disappearance. The other 3 had left the state or died, but Vexler, he stayed in Georgia, changed counties, bought a trailer under a trust name, disappeared off the grid. Reyes got the address. She found him outside of Lyons, Georgia, 70 miles southeast of Knox County. His trailer sat at the end of a red dirt road surrounded by tall grass. A single generator humming in the back. A half-dozen wind chimes clinked in the trees, and a scarecrow eyeless mouth sewn shut stood like a warning at the edge of the yard. Reyes approached the door and knocked twice. No answer. She waited, knocked again. Then the door creaked open. He stood in the shadow doorway. Gerald Vexler, unmistakable. Deep burn scars traced his cheek and down his neck. His left eye was milky white. "You should be here," he rasped. "I'm with Knox County Detective Monica Reyes. I'd like to speak with you about the bus." "I don't talk about that," he said. "No one does." "Someone did," she replied. "Ellie Thurman, you remember her?" He blinked. "I know you were on the payroll. You were listed as a substitute counselor, but there's no record of you ever seeing students. No files, no log visits. You were on staff when 20 kids disappeared." Vexler didn't move. His good eye darted past her to the woods. Reyes pressed. "Were you watching the excavation? Is that you on the camera?" Still nothing. Then he said quietly, "They said the program ended, that we were done, but we weren't." "What program?" He looked at her and whispered. The hollow route was never about getting him home. It was about unlearning. Inside his trailer, Vexler moved like I'm on carrying centuries. The air smelled of pine cleaner and old plastic. He sat slowly in a cracked leather recliner and stared at the TV, which wasn't plugged in. "I was supposed to help," he said almost to himself. "Observe, take notes, guide corrections." Were you part of Project Promise? Post-Promise, he muttered. Same people, different cover. They called it Stage 2, said the first group had failed because they didn't start young enough. Reyes sat across from him. Did you know what they were doing to the children? I didn't ask questions. They said it was educational therapy until I saw what the Red Room was. He paused. No windows, no clocks, just static pumped through the walls. Repetition drills. Food only when they obeyed. Punishment when they didn't. He scratched at the scars on his cheek. It tried to stop it. Told Harold. Told Nash we were breaking them. You were killing them. Number 1 didn't. That wasn't me. Harold went rogue. Started ignoring the chain of command. He said the girl Ellie was infecting the others. Said her writing had to be destroyed. Reyes's voice went sharp. But it wasn't. She left that notebook. She remembered everything. Vexler nodded slowly. She always remembered. She'd write it all down. Even when we took the pencils, she'd scratch it into the floor with her fingernails if we let her. She wasn't supposed to survive. Reyes narrowed her eyes. Then how did she get out? Vexler leaned back because she knew the route. Reyes drove back to the station in silence. Vexler's words echoing in her head. She knew the route, not the roads, not the schedule, the hollow route, the psychological framework they'd used, the structure, the pattern. And she'd found a way through it. Not just physically, mentally. When Reyes got back to her desk, she found a manila envelope waiting. No return address. Inside was a photograph dated October 1994. It showed the bus parked, still intact, not buried. A girl stood beside it. Ellie. A shadowed figure stood behind her, blurry, his face blocked by glare. But Ellie, she was looking straight at camera, expression blank, notebook in hand. The box was buried deep in storage, wedged behind outdated emergency plans and binders thick with faded copier ink. Reyes had spent the better part of 3 hours crawling through the sub-archives of the Knox County Unified School District, inhaling mildew and frustration, until she saw the label bus route logs 1993 to 1995 supervisor copy manual ledger. She pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside, stacked between carbon copy forms and oil-stained service receipts, was a handwritten ledger. Yellow pages carefully dated, each one marked with a blue ink stamp from Superintendent D.W. Charles. She flipped to September 1994. Every page showed the same stops, same order until September 14th, when a new entry appeared, a different location, no address, just a code. Stop number 21, X-tunnel crate drop. And then, again on the 15th, and again on the 16th, the day the children vanished. Reyes drove directly from the archives to the location Vexler had described 5 miles east of the bus burial site, in an area locals called the Dead Cut, where the county once tried to lay sewer lines, but abandoned the project due to unstable earth and budget overruns. There's no fence, no signage, just a break in the underbrush and an access tunnel covered by a rusted hatch and brush. She pulled it open. The air that hit her was thick with damp decay and something else. Gasoline. She clicked on her flashlight. The tunnel beneath was lined with metal crates, old ones, government-issued. Each one had stenciled white paint across the lid. Property of U.S. Department of Education. Restricted training materials. Reyes opened one. Inside a Realtor projector, dozens off tapes all labeled with bland bureaucratic titles. Module 1A, Authority Recognition. Module 3C, Parental Detachment Exercises. Module 5F, Fear Conditioning Audio. She reached for another crate. It contained transcripts, repetitions, drill sessions. Repeat until absorbed. There is no home but the one we are given. Pain is not punishment. Pain is correction. Her flashlight trembled. This wasn't school. It was programming, and Ellie had called to the Red Room. At the back of the tunnel, Reyes found a narrow break in the wall. Concrete chipped away to reveal another shaft, this one angling steeply downward. The air was colder, the walls wet with condensation. She followed the shaft for 40 feet before it opened into a subterranean holding chamber, a rectangular space lined with cement benches. Fur lines still dangled from hooks. Moldy blankets lay in a corner. On the floor was a single rust-stained mattress, and carved into the concrete wall with what looked like a piece of metal pipe were rows of tally marks. Dozens, hundreds, some crossed out, some circled. Beneath them, scratched with shaky hands, were words. "This is where they forget us. But I remember they made us numbers. But I am still Ellie. One day I will walk home." That night, back in her motel room, Reyes laid out the evidence like puzzle pieces. The bus was not a crash. The driver was murdered. The children were brought to a tunnel system designed for psychological conditioning. One child, Ellie, resisted, documented everything, and survived. But where had she gone? The only person left with an answer might be the one person no one had questioned yet. Daniel Harrow, the superintendent's son, now a county commissioner, and the man who signed off on the land transfer of the dead cut parcel in 1995, just 4 months after the disappearance. Reyes requested an interview. She expected stonewalling, excuses, maybe even security. But when she walked into the commissioner's office, he was already standing. A man in his 60s now, gray at the temples, sharp suit, eyes like cold iron. "Detective," he said, extending a hand she didn't take. "Mr. Harrow," she said flatly, "you were 35 when your father oversaw Project Promise's closure. You were on the school board when Route 5 vanished. You signed the parcel transfer." "I was a bureaucrat," he said. "I signed hundreds of things." "Did you read this one?" she asked, placing a photo on his desk. One off the children huddled in the tunnel, their eyes wide, IVs in their arms. "Head and blink. I don't know who they are, but you know what they are." A pause, then children who needed to be re-educated for the good of society. "And Eleanor Thurman." At that name, Harrow's expression flickered. "Just for a moment that she's gone," he said. "They all are. You should let the dead stay buried." "But she didn't die, did she?" Reyes leaned in. "She escaped and someone helped her." "I didn't have to answer your questions," Harrow said, voice tightening. "No," Reyes said, standing. "But when I have enough to indict, you'll be answering to a grand jury." She turned to leave. Before she'd reached the door, Harrow said quietly, "You're too late. The girl who left that tunnel, she isn't who you're hoping to find." Reyes didn't turn around. "Andy Aree, not the man you pretend to be." It was a scream that brought them running down a construction worker. Part of the crew clearing brush for the expanded forensic perimeter near Briar Hollow had stepped through a soft patch of dirt and sunk nearly to his knee. What he thought was a sinkhole turned out to be a shallow grave. The body was adult, male, recently buried, not skeletal. The man's driver's license, still tucked in his wallet, identified him as Calvin Rhodes, a former school district employee who had managed vehicle maintenance and route logs in the 1990s. He had gone missing just 6 days prior after Reyes pulled his name from the ledger records and requested an interview. Now he was dead, buried in the same forest that had swallowed 20 children 30 years ago. That same evening, Reyes sat across from Gerald Vexler, this time inside the secured interview room at Knox County Sheriff's Office. He'd turned himself involuntarily after receiving a mysterious envelope on his trailer porch. A copy of the autopsy report for Calvin Rhodes. A warning. "They're killing the old lynx," he said, quietly. "Anyone who remembers too much, you've got one shot to make this right," Reyes said. "Tell me everything." He did. According to Vexler, the program had never truly ended. After Project Promise was shut down in the early 80s, several of its most fervent supporters, mid-level government workers, educators, and psychological consultants decided to privatize the process. With no oversight, they experimented on smaller groups, runaway teens, juvenile delinquents, and eventually students taken under false pretenses. They used school infrastructure and used land, rerouted buses, old shelters buried in budgets. The children on Route 5 weren't kidnapped. They were redirected under district authority. Harold Nash had been chosen because of his silence, his record, his dependability. But something went wrong. Nash began to question the project's morality and began sympathizing with Ellie, the one child who never broke. The others began to follow her lead. They remembered their real names, refused to repeat the mantras. So Nash made a choice. He attempted to smuggle Ellie out. He was caught, and he was killed. "You weren't just an observer," Reyes said. Vexler shook his head, numbered him. I gave him the notebook, told him to let her keep it. She wrote it all down, and I thought she made it. She did. Reyes slid the photo across the table, the one of Ellie beside the bus. You took this, she said. Vexler blinked slowly. Yes, she escaped. I got her to the edge of town, told her to walk the tracks east. I was supposed to meet her the next day with a ride out, but when I came back, she was gone. Gone where? He looked up, eyes red. I don't know. I think someone got to her first. Later that night, Reyes paced her motel room, staring at the investigation board she'd tacked to the walls. Maps, mug shots, notebook pages, surveillance stills. So far, 19 children confirmed dead. 1 missing, Eleanor Thurman, Harold Nash, murdered. Calvin Rodas, murdered. Gerald Vexler confessed, collaborator Daniel Harrow, uncooperative, dangerous. Reyes's phone buzzed. It was the GBI lab. We just got a match on partial DNA found on the mattress in the tunnel. It's fresh days old. Whose is it? A beat. It's Eleanor Thurman's. The next morning, Reyes stood in the woods behind the tunnel site. A team was sweeping the area, but there was no sign of Ellie. Just a set of footprints near the clearing. Small female and a message scratched into the bark of a pine tree. I remember he still watches. Reyes turned in a slow circle. They had missed her by days, maybe hours. Back at the station, a voicemail was waiting. Unlisted number, static-filled. Then a girl's voice. Quiet, calm, tired. Stop asking about me. He's still out there. He follows the survivors. I can't be found. If you're reading this, it means someone finally listened. But that's not enough. They need to dig under the school. That's where the truth is buried. Click. The school had been condemned for 20 years. Dalton Elementary, once the pride of Knox County, now stood rotting beneath layers of ivy in silence. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine, and its windows had long since been shattered by time or vandals. When Rehe stepped onto the campus with her flashlight and warrant in hand, even the birds refused to sing. But beneath the decay was the original floor plan. She'd studied it for days. The cafeteria, the old gym, the administration office. But what caught her attention most was what wasn't on the blueprint. The basement, not listed, not measured, but mentioned in a staff memo from 1991 about routine flooding in lower storage. Reyes had found that note buried in a digital archive no one had touched since the district went bankrupt. So, she started at the cafeteria, following her gut and the smell of mildew and earth. Behind a rusted serving line was a steel door with a warped, authorized personalized and hanging sideways. She pushed it open. The stairs descended into shadow. The basement wasn't a basement. It was a compound. Reyes stepped into a corridor that extended in both directions. Concrete walls lined with clipboards, cracked light fixtures, and faded motivational posters that hadn't seen sunlight since before the Clinton administration. Silence is strength. The best students don't talk back. You are loved enough to be corrected. The flashlight beam swept over doors. Room B, Observation 1, Isolation Unit. And then she saw it painted in peeling red above a locked steel door. The hollow house. She pried the door open with a crowbar. Inside was a chamber like nothing she'd seen in the tunnels. Clean, cold, intentional, soundproof panels lined the walls. A projector was bolted to the ceiling. 3 child-sized chairs faced a black and white monitor that was still flickering static. On the far wall hung a corkboard. Dozens of photographs pinned in careful rows. Children seated in rows. Children wired to electrodes. Children sleeping under fluorescent lights. And in the corner beneath a red exit sign that led nowhere was another green spiral notebook. She froze. It was identical to Ellie's. Only this one had a name scrolled on the inside cover. Subject 12. Observe only. Do not reassign. Possible contamination risk. The pages were nearly full. This was not Telly's notebook. It was about her. Written in sharp adult handwriting. Notes, schedules, punishments. Child continues to resist collective behavior assimilation. Displays alarming recall. Subject has started documenting treatment protocols. Attempts to remove notebook unsuccessful. Subject becomes violent when separated from it. Team recommends termination. Supervisor Nyes says subject 12 will become a control group. Control group. Reyes exhaled shakily. They had kept her not out of mercy, but to watch, to study Theone, who didn't break, and that meant someone had been monitoring her far longer than anyone realized. She turned back to the corkboard. A photo in the top left corner caught her eye. It showed a young girl, hair matted, hospital gown too big, seated at a table with her hands folded, blank stare thin. But it wasn't Ellie. It was someone else. And standing behind her with one hand on her shoulder was Daniel Harrow. Later, back at the sheriff's office, Reyes confronted Vexler. "You lied," she said, throwing the photo on the table. Harrow wasn't just a bureaucrat. He was in that basement. He was running it. Vexler's face collapsed that I didn't know. "I swear to God, I didn't know he was there. You told me you helped Ellie escape." "I did, but he must have followed her. He must have found her before she could leave. I didn't know she'd been brought back." "She wasn't brought back," Reyes said, quietly. "She never left." Vexler flinched, and in that moment, Reyes realized what Ellie had been trying to say. Not in the voicemail, not in her journal, but in the sheer fact that she still existed. The hollow route hadn't ended in 1994. It never stopped, and Ellie Thurman had become its ghost. That night, a drone team was sent to scan beneath Dalton Elementary's West Wing. Ground-penetrating radar returned an anomaly, a sealed corridor, not listed on any blueprints. 5 doors, heavy shielding. Reyes suited up and entered at dawn with a tactical team. The hall smelled like ammonia and silence. Inside the 5th door,